Hello. This talk is UX for developers. I think that whether you're building your own app or working on a small startup or working on a big team, UX is a really important thing for everybody to understand. I'm Calley Nye. I'm a product designer at CrowdRise. And what is a product designer? Not many people know. Basically, I love UX. I work with designers, developers, and the product team. And on all of them, my sole focus is UX. I develop, I design, and I work with the product team. And I just try to preach UX to everybody. What is user experience? There's a lot of definitions I could tell you here, but basically, user experience, very simply, is caring about your users. It's that simple. We want to understand how they feel, their goals, their motivations, their fears, and their frustrations. We want people to enjoy our products. It's really that simple. Now, this doesn't look very simple. This demonstrates what you might think UX is. These are all just tools. Those are all tools that you can use to try to empathize with your users or identify your users, but none of them are a substitute for actually just caring and empathizing with them. I'm not going to teach you any of these things today. I just want to boil them down into a couple things that you can use anytime. It's like SEO. Like SEO, 80% of it you're never going to know. But that doesn't mean that you can't use some of it to drive the products that you're making. You can put alt text on images. You can order your headings correctly. And with all that, you can have a decently performing site. But one day you're going to hire an SEO expert to do all that stuff for you. And even then, you still can't forget about it. It's still everybody's job. Same things with UX. Basically, all of UX boils down to one thing: empathy. Empathy is the capacity to recognize emotions that are being experienced by another person. You can't solve a user's problem if you don't understand them. Anybody doing any job struggles with doing this. For example, say you're an EMT, you're tired from a long shift, you're annoyed at everything, and you get called to a really annoying, boring chest pain call. The patient's being obtuse, it's not answering your questions, and basically just making your life hell. What you have to remember, even in that position, is that that person, your user in that case, is having the worst day of their lives. And even when you're face-to-face with your user in that sense, it's still hard to remember that. You still have to remind yourself that this is a job for me, but this is the worst day of their life. And we have it even harder as developers because we don't even get to see our users. We very rarely get to see who our users are. So we can't empathize with, a number in Google Analytics. So we have to try it and go above and beyond to see who our users are. To us, users are this amorphous, faceless blob that do things that we hate. They use IE. They just make your life hell. That's, in our sense, to us, that's what users do. But we do have to remember that users are people. They have feelings, and they are the reason you have a job. So you should care. Your first reaction might be to be annoyed, but just try to think it's maybe it's your aunt or your cousin or your mom, and just try to feel for them. There are 7 facets to a good user experience. It's pretty simple. You ask yourself these questions. Is your product useful? It sounds simple, but it's a lot more complicated than it sounds. Is it usable? Usability is only a small piece of that. Is it desirable, enjoyable to use? Is it findable? Can people find what they need on your site? Is it accessible? Are you working with people with disabilities? Is it credible? Does your product appear trustworthy? And at the center is it valuable? This is at the center has nothing to do with users. If this product is valuable to stakeholders, and if it's going to make you money, because if that's not the case, it's not going to be around to serve those users. So at the bottom of it, you do have to make it a business. Okay, so I'm going to make a bold statement. Don't hate me, but experience is greater than functionality. And I know you guys work on functionality, so that sucks, but I have a question. How many of you have built a feature or a product that no one has ever used? Okay. How many of you are bad programmers? Exactly. It's because people don't use things because of the front end. So it doesn't matter the work that you put into it if it sucks on the front end. The user doesn't see all the work that you put on the back end. They only see the front end. So it doesn't matter if a developer spends that much time on the front end or the back end with neglecting the front end, you're just going to waste your time. I really want to drive this home for you guys because I care about you guys and I want to prevent for you every developer's worst nightmare, which is deleting 6 months of your work. If you do this, we can try and prevent that. Here's an example. Not too many users get all hot and bothered about data backups, but Apple made it fun when they released Time Machine in 2007. It took some pretty boring functionality and it made it fun. It made it all time machine-y, and people loved it. But not too many people realized that it had been around for 10 years previously in Microsoft's Windows 95, like that. So it doesn't matter that these Windows developers who made this 10 years previous, it doesn't matter because no one used it. No one wanted to. It wasn't fun. So all of that time was wasted. So a little newsflash is you do UX every day and you don't even know it. Raise your hand if you've debated any of these things. Right. So in these cases, your coworkers and your future self are the users that you care about. Your code is a product and the users are developers. Like I said before, it's easier to empathize with people when you see their face and you see your coworkers' faces every day. So it's easy to empathize with them. All right, so basically that's UX, but what is UX not? UX is not UI design. You can have a great UX without ever opening Photoshop. You don't even need to have a traditional interface. If you're writing a Node module or JavaScript library, you can have a well-written README and organized, and you can have detailed demos. Like, why do you choose to use Node over ASP.NET? It's because it's a better experience. No one opened Photoshop or OmniGraffle. It was a great experience. UX is not idiot-proofing. First of all, calling your user stupid kind of goes against the whole empathizing thing. And idiot-proofing implies that your users are idiots coming into it. And I want to say that you're creating those idiots. You're doing something that makes them feel stupid. Every time you do that, you're creating an idiot. So don't dismiss what they're saying to you as stupid or out of hand. They're telling you what's true. UX is not usability. Usability is a piece of it. But you don't need to have a dead simple usability experience. It can be, like, you can ask questions. You don't have to narrow a form down to the minimum amount of fields. You can have a great experience if you make those fields enjoyable, if you're teaching them like what they need to be doing. UX is not a checkbox. This means that UX is not something that you can check off and be done with. It drives every single thing that you do. Dealing with humans is never an exact science. They're emotional, unpredictable, and fallible. You will be wrong about some of the assumptions you make about UX, and that's totally fine. UX is not about being right. It's about realizing when you're wrong and adjusting to that. So UX is not over when a feature ships. You have to monitor it and see if it's actually working, if it's doing what you expected it to do. Most importantly, UX is not one person's job. If you have a UX person working for you, that doesn't mean that it's not your job anymore. UX person is not going to solve every UX problem single-handedly. A good UX person is actually just a facilitator of conversations. They do user interviews, stakeholder interviews, user research, and they take those things and they feed them to every other department and facilitate those UX conversations with everybody else. So everybody has the equipment they need to solve those problems. And even then, some things slip past us. So they end up falling in a developer's lap. For example, you get this login screen as PSD and your designer tells you to develop that. There might be some things that come into your lap that you have to decide that might not have been decided before. And it's your job to notice these things. For example, will the username accept a username and email? If it does, are you using an email input tag? Are you using autocorrect and auto-capitalize tags correctly? Will the fields validate separately, or will you get the generic, your email or password is incorrect? If they got their password wrong, are you going to keep the email in the username, or the username in the username field? These are all things that you're going to come to. They're probably not going to be discovered before. And maybe easier to just do exactly what you're told to do, but you'll have to redo it if QA finds it. And if not, then you're responsible for the UX, the bad UX going into the product. So just do it now. Okay. So we know what UX is and isn't. So now, how do you use it? Hopefully I've persuaded you to realize that UX isn't something you can ignore. The next thing to understand, and the biggest thing, is you are not the user, ever. I'm going to say that again. You are never, ever the user. This is a really hard thing for people to accept, because when you start working on a product on your own, you're solving your problem. So you think that you're the only person who needs that problem solved. If you are the only person who needs that problem solved, you shouldn't be starting a business, because you cannot run a business that way. Couple reasons why you are not the user. You have a very different level of expertise. There's a thing called the curse of knowledge. And it's basically the problem where once we know something, we find it hard to imagine not knowing it. We have difficulty sharing it with others because we can't recreate their state of mind. So this happens when you put the login button where it is. At some point, if someone says, I don't know where the login is, to you, it's like, are you kidding me? It's right there. But you know it. You can't really put yourself in someone's shoes when you know it that way. And also that, you may be an expert in something. Like, to write a JavaScript library, you need to be a JavaScript expert. But you don't have to be a JavaScript expert to use it. The people who created jQuery were JavaScript experts, but the people who use it are not. Some of them have never written a single line of vanilla JS in their lives, but that's what makes jQuery great. Again, don't hate me. But another reason why you are not your user is that you give a shit about your product and no one else does. You care about your product, that's why you made it, but the user has to care about how it solves their problem. And if you haven't gotten to that step, it's not going to succeed, no matter how much you think it's going to change everyone's lives. You may know without a doubt that that your product will make their lives better, but if you don't make it so that they see it immediately, it doesn't matter at all. So, if you're not the user, then who is? This is the first tool a method that you can use in doing this. Personas. Personas is basically giving a face to your user. This is the single most important tool a developer can use. UX is all about empathy. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. Personas give you that other. You don't have it without that. Personas are, above all things, user models. They are models and composition of real user behavior. They are not real people. They have goals, they have motivations, personas I can't say that word. Emphasize, there we go, the important features and de-emphasize the less significant details. One thing I hear all the time is, but I want everybody to use my product. Well, don't we all? But we won't be successful if we start there. If you're designing for everyone, you're designing for no one. If you take a 28-year-old stockbroker, a soccer mom, and a farmer, do you think you'd be able to make a vehicle that meets all of their needs? Do you think you might be more successful if you made a sports car, a minivan, and a pickup truck? Right. Many successful companies started small. Amazon went straight for book lovers. PayPal, they targeted Palm Pilot users. Focusing on one market does not mean that you can't eventually expand into others. When you solve one problem thoroughly for one person, you will have a fanatical user. I'm sure you've seen fanatical users in your day. It happens, and they make your product successful. So a couple examples of what persona is. This is a persona from Corbis Images. It identifies an emergent creative, which is one of their user types. It has skills, needs, knowledge, goals, and a little bit of a narrative. Here's another one from them, a different version. And personas can take any form, whatever works for you. This one is from MailChimp. They have these posted all around their office, in the developer room, everywhere, because they want to remind their developers when you're doing anything, you're doing it for them. So why do we use personas? A few reasons. Scope. Personas help you figure out where to start. If you're not building a product for everyone, but just for one person, it's easier to determine what the person will need if you know who that person is. Communication. You might have an idea of who you're making this for in your head, but if you're working with anybody else, getting it on paper, make sure that you're all on the same page. And there's this thing called the elastic user that I come across all the time. You're in a conversation and someone says, yeah, but would their user really know how to do that? Or, I think the user would think that's stupid. Basically, the user becomes this thing that you're using to make your point. So it's a reason for you to build whatever you want while you're still pretending to be in it for the user. So personas are a lot easier because there's a lot less conjecture about what a user would or would not be able to do. You can very simply say, yes, Sarah would know how to do that. Acquisition. Personas can help you figure out what other products your users are currently using, what their problems are, what they're currently doing to solve their problems, and how they're doing it. This gives you a ton of information about how to market to them, and maybe create some creative growth hacking ideas. Outreach. And afterwards, when you're trying to improve your product, you know who to target it to because you identified them, and you know what questions to ask. Okay, let's make a persona. I want to explain something before I go any further. Personas, there's a lot of different ways to make personas. There's established methods. There's books, many books written about this. And I'm not teaching you that. I've hacked the persona model to work for developers because I know what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. And I'm only going to show you what you're going to do. Okay, so I'm going to use a sample app for this process. It's called Food Trucker. It's an app to track and share the location and menus of food trucks. I really want a good one of these, so if any of you want to make it, go ahead. Just let me know. Okay, step one is research. Whether you have users, if you're working on a product that already has users or whether you're working on a product that doesn't have users, you can do this step. If you have existing users, it's really simple. Just talk to them. Do surveys, ask them questions, and use analytics. If you don't have users yet, you have to get a little bit creative. And this process is going to change for anybody who's any different product. There's going to be different phases of research. So for Food Trucker, I'm going to go to my friend's office and I'm going to ask him some questions about, do they use food trucks? Do they know where they are? Just general questions. I'm also going to go to a food truck and I'm going to talk to the food truck owner about how he markets his truck. Just going to start up a conversation, ask some questions, see if I can identify some other problems that he's having. I'm going to Google how to market food trucks. It's an easy one. I'm just going to read about what people are doing right now. I'm going to look about the competition. I'm going to look at reviews. I'm going to see what they're doing wrong. I'm going to look at the product, and I'm going to see if there's anything I can improve upon. So now we're going to analyze. So if you're on a team, if there's a couple of you doing this, and you're going to sit down together, just discuss your observations, and you're going to basically identify a few different things. You're going to identify behavior and roles. So here, for us, the different persona roles are food truck owner and eater of foods. If you're working on a music app, you might have an artist and a fan and a manager. You might have different, depends on your product. So you can have 10 or you can have 1. So now we're going to group some behavioral observations to their appropriate roles. So I'm going to say what I've noticed about the food truck owners first, and then I'm going to talk about what I've talked about the eaters. Behavioral observations are activities, aptitudes, attitudes, motivations, and skills. Just general things that you notice. So for the food truck owner, I found out that they use Twitter to market themselves. Their biggest challenge is finding locations. They're looking for catering opportunities. Not very tech savvy. Wants to focus on making food, not technology. And the eater of foods. Sick of eating the same food at work every day. Would like to see menus, wants more variety. Uses Twitter and Facebook at work. Would like to be alerted when their favorite truck is around. Very tech savvy. Wants to be able to share with friends and coworkers, and after drinking, enjoys a good taco. This process, if nothing else, will validate or invalidate what you're doing. You'll either identify different areas that you can go into, or it could give you a better direction, or it could just say that you're doing the right thing. So whether you or not you use these personas, it's a good process to go through. So next is my favorite step, finding the name and photo for your persona. So this is going to be a user persona. You can have multiple personas based on those roles. But one important thing to remember is that personas don't need to be representative of all demographics. If you've got 2 white guys as personas, I'm not saying that I'm only making a product for white guys. I'm just like market segments are defined by demographics. Personas are defined by goals. So in most cases, somebody's nationality or their age or their gender is not going to affect the goal. The point is you just want to focus on their goals. Okay, so when you're picking a photo, you want to browse through and find something that you can empathize with. This is not something I can empathize with. The choice of photo is really important. This is personally where I start all of my personas because I find something that I can empathize with the most, and then I basically make the details of that persona around that photo. So it's impossible to empathize with this because it's so contrived. Stock photos don't work very well. This is a little bit better. I tried to find one with food. I just couldn't find it. So this guy looks relatable. One thing to consider at this point is if you're going to print this out and put it in your office, make sure you find a high quality photo now before you get attached to it. Next, it's really easy to find the name because you go to randomnamegenerator.info. It's important. There's a couple things to consider. It needs to be able to evoke some of the qualities of the persona, but it has to not be distracting or stereotypical. So a standard way to do is just go to the random name generator and just like find the one that speaks to you. You'll see like 10 of them. You'll be like, that's not right. But I landed on Sean Dixon. Looks like a Sean, right? All right. All right. Step 4 is details. First, we're going to start with some demographic details. I'm also going to give him an archetype name. I'm calling Sean the office omnivore. It's just kind of fun. It just defines a little bit about who they are. You can have fun with it. So these details are relatable and plausible. He's 31 years old, lives in San Diego, works as an account manager at a healthcare startup, makes $80,000 a year, and he's single. These are all pretty much made up things, but they're all plausible. This is somebody that would use our app. So you can add as many details as you want, as you're comfortable with, or as little as you want. But some things to do that are fun is to add images, so you can kind of round it out. Like the Corbis example had images of the photos that photographer was taking. So we're going to use favorite foods. These are some of Sean's favorite foods. Just makes it a little bit more fun because it's a little bit relatable. Because you're like, I love tacos too. Next, you want to just go through and kind of, based on the research that you did, the person that you like, if you talk to somebody who was very like Sean, take some of the things that you learned from him and attach it to this persona. For example, the skills and habits. He uses Twitter and Facebook at work. He's very tech savvy, has an iPhone 6, uses Tinder to find dates, and uses a MacBook Pro. These are all things that might not seem super important, but they do get you thinking creatively, because if he's really comfortable with Tinder, maybe you can incorporate some of that interaction into your app. Maybe you can swipe right and go to a taco truck. There's all these things that thinking this way will make you think a lot more creatively. I like to attach a quote. Basically, they're expressing their pain point, the thing that you're trying to solve. I'm sick of eating the same thing at work every day. I need more variety. Basically, it's just you want to be able to look at it and see what you're solving this for. So next, we're going to create a bio. It's totally up to you whether you want to use a narrative or bullet points. It does not affect the final outcome because right now you're going to be the one using it. Just illustrate in whatever way that works for you why they need your product and how it would fit into their lives. Here's a simple bio. Sean loves working in downtown San Diego. He's a foodie and loves the variety of cuisine available to him. But he's been in his job for over 2 years, so the variety is getting a bit stale. He'd love to go to food trucks more, but he has a hard time figuring out what food trucks are nearby, and he's always missing his favorite one. I do this all the time. I go to Twitter and I find out they were in my neighborhood yesterday. Hate that. So a couple goals that we have to establish. There's 3 different types of goals: life, end, and experience goals. Experience goals are pretty universal and simple. Feel smart and in control. Feel cool. Be reassured about security. Feel heard. These are pretty much universal for every app. but these are basically the things that the user feels that you need to acknowledge in your app. End goals are the goals that are related to your app. These kind of coincide with the functionality of it. Be alerted to food trucks nearby. Discover new favorite food trucks. Influence food trucks to come to my area. Be reminded simply and not be distracted from work. These are basically just drives the product's behavior. Life goals, a little bit deeper, and for some apps they're not really appropriate, like this, but it addresses the user's high-level personal goals. So for here, it's be a connoisseur of international foods, be popular and respected by my peers. It might make more sense for a productivity app, where they would say, be able to spend more time with my family. Here, it's not as important. These basically drive brand strategy and high-level concepts. So you've created a persona now, yay. So now what do you do with a persona? If you feel like there's more needs and goals that need to be addressed, you can create more personas. Maybe I'm gonna create a persona for a bar hopping girl who loves tacos. And you can have more than one persona per role. If you do, you have one primary persona. You select that one, and that one person is who you're building it for. The other people you have to be aware of, and you can achieve their goals as long as they don't sacrifice the goals of the primary persona. And you can also create personas for the other roles, like the food truck driver, food truck owner. You can design these personas any way you want. You can lay them out in different formats, whatever you feel comfortable with. It could be a markdown file. It could be a website. It could be whatever you want. You can print them out and put them around your office to remind everybody of this is why you're here. A couple other things that you can do with personas now. One of them is scenarios. If personas are the characters, scenarios are the plot. You can use scenarios to describe how your persona would use your product to achieve their goals. Making one scenario per goal is a good place to start. Scenarios are kind of like use cases, but a little bit higher level. So for Sean, his goal is to be alerted to favorite food trucks nearby. A good scenario might be, Sean has had a busy morning with calls and has more scheduled after lunch. He starts to get the daily routine of choosing a spot for lunch when he gets an alert from food trucker saying that his favorite taco truck will be parked 2 blocks away near the park. When, he thinks to himself, he tweets this to his coworkers to see if anyone wants to join him for a Santa Fe burrito in the park. If you do these for every one of his goals, you now have a project scope. You have everything that you need to start because you're solving all of those goals. Another awesome thing that you can do with personas after you develop is user testing. User testing is a scary thing for most people, but it doesn't have to be. It can be really simple. Leave like the traditional user testing to user experience people, but you can do this thing called guerrilla UX user testing. You basically go to Starbucks. You find somebody that kind of might represent your persona and ask to buy his coffee and ask if he'll use your app for 5 minutes. And you give him your phone, he plays with it a little bit. You just tell him, you try not to influence him in any way. You just say, can you just use this? Let me know if you're thinking anything. And if you're thinking anything, just try and think it out loud. I'm not going to answer your questions, but I do want to hear them. And you just have him use it, and you can see that. It's a really easy process, and most people are more than willing to do it. You can do this if you're not comfortable going to Starbucks. You can go to somebody's office, talk to your friends or friends of friends. But be careful not to influence their behavior in any way. What I like about user testing is that you can do most of it in 2 tests. If you did 15 tests, you would probably discover 100% of the problems with your site. If you did 5 tests, you would discover 85. And if you did 2 tests, you would discover 50. So basically, after 2 tests, you're just hearing a lot of the same shit over and over again, and occasionally hearing something cool. So that's pretty much it. Hopefully you can take this and make some awesome user experiences. And if you have any other questions, let me know. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah?
Any recommended reading for developers?
Oh, there's so many. My favorite book for developers to read is a book called The Inmates Are Running the Asylum. And it is, yeah, exactly. It's a little bit old, so some of the examples are a little outdated. But it's the first book that introduces personas as a concept. And it's written by this guy, Alan Cooper. who was the father of Visual Basic. So he started out as a programmer, and now he's one of the leaders in user experience design. And he knows what you're going through. So it's a really, really great book.
Will you have these slides on, maybe on the slides that you have here will be available? Or
I
something
can
like that?
put them somewhere.
So, yeah, if Calley puts them online, we'll be sure to include in the next mailer.
Follow her on Twitter.
Yeah.
Follow Calley on Twitter. And then, like usual, all of our talks are online.
Yeah.
Join the mailing list. We send them out every month. Any other questions?
All right.
Hey, you seem really cool and smart. Do you by any chance work at a really awesome startup? Are you hiring JavaScript developers?
Maybe. I do, I think. I work at a really great startup called CrowdRise, and we're hiring JavaScript developers, front-end developers, back-end developers, and QA engineers. So pretty much running the gamut. So if you're looking for a job, please talk to us because we're awesome. And you get to work with me, so fuck yeah. Anybody else? Yeah?
I guess I really appreciated your talk because it you really hit. I think you really hit home on user experience. Have you ever thought about developer experience?
How so?
I think there's. I mean, for what it's worth, when you're making your products, I mean, you're obviously making it for a user.
Mm-hmm.
But the more I use like a lot of different libraries, functional programming, Haskell, things like that, the more I realize there's so many beautiful things out there. Like, why is jQuery so special? Why are the Stream API? Why is piping such like an incredible thing? And I guess one of the things I was thinking about was I feel like user experience is actually really important because if you make a product and it sucks and nobody wants to use it, it's not going to do well. But I also think a lot about, because I'm a programmer, I program a lot. So I also think about like what is my most fantastic like developer experience? Like what libraries do I really like using? What APIs do I really like using?
Yeah, that's all user experience. Like if you're developing one of those things, absolutely make a persona. Because the example I use with like jQuery, like jQuery is built by JavaScript experts, but it was made for people who aren't. And there's conversations like this. I read an article called something about Java closures, and it was all about this whole concept of we can learn from user experience. So if you're developing any kind of developer product, focusing on user experience is still a huge issue. The fact that you're a developer does not mean that there's not things that you can learn from potential users. Like just because you're a developer does not mean that you understand every other developer in the world. The whole process does still stay the same. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay.
Give it up.